Time, please. I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. It's Wednesday at the NFL Combine, which means we finally get to start talking to players. Linebackers and defensive linemen specifically. Who am I looking at the closest? Find out here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose on all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. Thank you for making us your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. Right now, FanDuel, make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets by winning with any winning $5 bet. That's right, $150 if your bet wins by visiting FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, everyone, let's get a few notes out of the way before the show starts. One, we apologize to those who prefer to listen to this show on the audio platforms, Spotify and Apple Podcasts and places like that. Locked On is going through some network changes as far as how we upload the shows to get to those feeds, and with those changes, my uploads have not been getting there. Locked On is looking to remedy that. We hope that they remedy that soon, because that's important to get out to those listeners. But in the meantime, if you ever are wondering where the episode is and why it's not up, just come here on YouTube and you'll be able to watch it too, and stream it that way. We thank everyone for understanding as. So second note here, Omar Khan obviously didn't talk on Monday or Tuesday, which means we don't have any notes on him like we expected we would. We're with a difficult time right now. So let's talk about the Combine, and which is where I'm here in Indianapolis in a hotel room recording from right now. And there's a lot of excitement right now around just the prospects that are available, but two groups that are probably among the least talked about groups of all the primary positions of football are linebacker and defensive line this year. It's not an elite defensive line class. There's no Jalen Carter that just steps out as a potential pick. There's no there's no edge rusher that's considered to be a first overall pick, or even it might be a stretch to call any of them a top 10 pick, maybe there. But linebackers, I think there's a good chance that there won't be a linebacker picked in the first round in this draft class. So with all that being said, though, why is it important? Well, those are two positions in need, in my opinion, with the Pittsburgh Steelers. They need to be able to go get a younger piece that adds with Keanu Benton for the future at defensive tackle, a piece that maybe could be a little bit more specialized to rushing the passer, maybe could double up as another run defender who can eat up blockers and open up other two opportunities for others. But that's certainly a need that they can get. But do not overlook linebacker. And that's where I want to focus on to start the show. We'll get to defensive line in a bit. But I think that some people are undervaluing what linebacker can do for a defense. You go back and you look at what some of the great things the Chiefs did this past season. Linebackers were very important. If you have good athletic linebackers who can both stop the run and cover, they are the guys that can glue the defense together. And I think the Steelers had been missing that glue for quite some time in their defense. I think this year they got a good bit of that from Landon Roberts. He was very consistent playmaker, guy that was able to fill in and do well, a good role player, not a superstar, but a good role player and a guy that you like to have on your defense. I think they could use some star power at linebacker. And I think there's guys that can potentially be at that level. And when I say star power, I don't mean, NFL Defensive Player of the Year type players, though that's always nice. But I mean guys who can create turnovers, guys who can be the players who stuff the run on their own when teams think that they have the great situation because they're running backs one-on-one with a linebacker at the second level. I think that that's where the Steelers need to go find someone, and someone young that they can build around for the future, because they've tried to bring in veterans, Cole Holcomb, who I think was fine this year before he got injured, but he's had a serious injury, and we don't know the extent of that injury to this day about how long he might be out for, to start the season. Will his therapy or will his, rehab, will it take up time in the spring when the Steelers are going through rookie camp and mini camp and getting ready, that kind of leave the Steelers in a situation where they definitely could address line class that I think that could be really good fits as maybe not a first round pick, definitely not a first round picks, but as second and third or even fourth round picks, guys that can be contributors to this defense and develop into more than that. And again, if you find the right linebacker who can stuff the run, blitz, cover, do those multitudes of things, it makes the job for everyone else easier. It's another way, if you have a good cover linebacker, to help free up Minkah Fitzpatrick more so he doesn't have to keep jumping down into the box, more and more often. So that's why I keep looking at linebacker and I keep thinking, hey, this could really work out if the Steelers get the right guy. But who is the right guy? Well, let's go through some of the linebacker guys out there and people that are looking at. With the first group that's going to take the podium Wednesday morning, I'm really intrigued to see two guys in particular of this group, and it's Jeremiah Trotter of Clemson and Jalen Ford of Texas. I think that Jeremiah Trotter, coming into this year, he was the guy that everyone looked at and saw as the guy who could have been the first round pick of the linebackers, could have been a guy that was the top linebacker off the board. His performance this year didn't live up to that compared to some of the other guys who are being considered in that quality. But still, he could certainly be a guy that could be a good player in the NFL, and someone the Steelers should legitimately consider in the third round. I think that's his spot. Jalen Ford out of Texas could be a guy that could be a depth piece who can grow into becoming a starter if they're content, if they know they're getting Cole Holcomb back and they're content to have him and Landon Roberts and maybe even bring back Quan Alexander so that he's the fourth option, meaning Jalen Ford instead of a Mark Robinson or a Michael Walker or another practice squad guy of that caliber. So there are options there when it comes to when it comes to getting a later guy. So that's the first group. And the second group, I look around, I think there's some, the big name that comes up there is the guy that I think that could be the difference maker as far as linebackers, and that's Payton Wilson out of NC State. Payton Wilson, a guy I saw play firsthand in the ACC, really talented guy. A guy who's 6'4", has 4 interceptions this past year. If he runs well at the combine, he's going to turn some heads with that size. If he's able to move and change direction well in the shuttles and things like that, it's going to be really interesting to see. Now, the big drawback with Payton Wilson is his knee injuries. And people have been asking about them. People have been talking about them. I even posted like, hey, that's a guy I would bang the table for, and getting a Payton Wilson. I think he could be that glue player that I was talking about. But people saying, well, Chris, he has injury history. Why would you take him? Well, how did the Steelers get Darnell Washington last year? Because people were talking about his knees and talking about his injury history. And I think the Steelers are in a position, have kind of, gotten into a good situation with Darnell Washington. Now, Payton Wilson, will it definitely work out? I'm not sure. But I think if he runs well at this combine, and just like he performed well at the Senior Bowl, I think he might put to bed some of those ideas that his injuries are going to take away from his value as a first round pick, or not a first round pick. I mean, some people are starting to consider him as that. I think he's more of a second round pick quality there. And I think that if he tests well, he won't be around in the third round for sure, with his capabilities. But Payton Wilson, he's going to be a person of primary importance for me to kind of get up to and see at the podium and make sure that they're there. But there's also another player in his who's going to speak at the same time. That's Junior Colson out of Michigan. Junior Colson's more of the traditional old school run stuffing downhill defense linebacker who can stuff the run, who can be physical at the point of attack, do the things that the Steelers like from their linebackers as tone setters. And that's something to consider, versus a Payton Wilson who can do that at times, but he's not as good as Junior Colson at doing that. But Payton Wilson's also better at covering than Junior Colson. So there's going to be questions there about what those guys have worked to improve the injury status of Payton Wilson. But either way, I do think that it's still an exciting opportunity for the Steelers to take looks at some of these guys that are there. Then in the third group, I'm really intrigued to see two guys in particular here, and that's Edgerrin Cooper, who for some people say he is the best pure linebacker of this class out of Texas A&M. A lot of people are saying that he could be that guy, but don't overlook a guy like Cedric Gray out of North Carolina. Cedric Gray is another good athlete. Guy I saw firsthand in the ACC. And I think that he could be a guy that could be one of those role player type guys added on defense, and he wouldn't cost you a first round pick or a second round pick, probably not even a third round pick. He could be one of those 2 back-to-back fourth rounders the Steelers are holding on to right now. I want to talk more about linebackers and then get into defensive line and more combine talk here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Don't go away. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. There's always chances to win at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. If you're like me, football season being done does not mean that I'm done with sports. FanDuel gives you so many ways to play with NBA, NHL, college basketball, and so much more action. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end your run here with a W. You can make quick bets. You can make live same game parlays. You can get exclusive prop bets and so many more things. But new customers, join FanDuel today and you'll get the best part of that. And it's the $150 in bonus bets that you'll receive if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. We're also brought to you by BetterHelp Therapy Online. BetterHelp. When we're talking about therapy, people often think about the first thing that they do if they'd ever have an extra hour in their day. Maybe you'd go for a run. Maybe you'd read a book or be there for a friend, do something healthy. But what if you were just being there for yourself? That's where therapy can come in, because therapy can help you find what matters most to you and allow you to plan to do more of it. I've certainly benefited in my life from the help of good therapists who have helped me sort out the most important things so that I can try to balance every single day, not just the things I have to do, but the things I've always wanted to do. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp knows that life can be busy and stressful, so it's designed to be suitable for your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire matched with a licensed therapist, and you can even switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're here continuing to get you ready for the combine and the players I'm going to be talking to or looking to talk to, at this combine. Again, going back through the linebackers, I talked about Edgerrin Cooper and I talked about Cedric Gray there. I'm really excited for Payton Wilson. If he can show people that his knees aren't bad, he could be a really good prospect. And if the Steelers land him, I think he could be the guy that pulls the defense together and brings together a developing secondary with a defensive line, that has both old and young players on it, trying to turn things around. So with that being said, that was the linebackers. It shouldn't be overlooked. There's other guys that I think that are way down the list, like Tyron Hopper of Missouri. There's going to be interesting guys, just diamonds in the rough that'll be there. But also, I don't think that the Steelers can afford to look past the defensive line, because that's where the Steelers are going to want to find another place. And if you know Andy Weidel, he's big on finding guys in the trenches who can dominate. And that's a big part of what made the Eagles good. And I think that could be a big part of what makes the Steelers good. Heck, you look back over the past few years when the Steelers defense has been at its best recently, it's when Cam Hayward was wrecking shop along with TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith. At times it was Bud Dupree and Stephon Tuitt with that crew. But Cam Hayward can only do but so much more. He's 35 years old for this season. And it's going to be a test for him. So I think the Steelers need to be looking at defensive line. So let's take a look at some of the defensive line prospects that are out there and the groups that they're speaking in, so we can kind of just get an idea. If you guys can kind of get an idea of how I plot out who to talk to in different groups. Now, the first group is primarily more like there's a lot of edge guys in that group, guys like Jared Verse, guys like Chop Robinson. All those guys, the Steelers aren't taking another edge, especially early. Like if they do, it's going to be late, and it's just going to be like stab in the dark there to get a guy. I think that the Steelers have done well enough at edge rusher between TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, the signing of Marcus Golden, the drafting of Nick Herbig. there's a lot of things on their side. They can stay away from that one. So instead, they need to be looking at interior defensive linemen. And that's where I think things can be really interesting for the Steelers, is that this isn't a super talented defensive line class, right? There's no Jalen Carter that just sings out to you and says, oh, that guy has a really good chance to be a superstar. But I think there's a lot of guys who could be really good, who could be turned into those role players that we're talking about that make a difference for the Pittsburgh Steelers, especially at defensive line. Now, the question will be, and I talked more about this also on the North Shore Drive podcast with Ray Fittipaldo from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, so check that out if you haven't already. But I look at the interesting dilemma here that the Steelers are facing. They have Keanu Benton. Keanu Benton's more of a run stuffer. He's more of a physical guy. He's going to take on double teams. He's going to push guys into the backfield. But do they want a guy who's a pass rush specialist on the inside? That's a serious question. Would they prefer another run stuffer or a pass rusher who could fill this role? Now, the Steelers could also fill this role in free agency, though they're already investing a lot at defensive line. But let's take a look at some of these other prospects that are out there that could be legitimately considered. And again, looking at them in their groups. Now, this first group that kind of is defensive line, there aren't as many. There aren't as many different types of guys, but there's one player in particular, T'Vondre Sweat, out of Texas. I think Texas has two guys in their defensive line who could both be very interesting picks. T'Vondre Sweat could be that guy in the second round where he's big, he's strong, he could be tough up front. I think Byron Murphy's the other Texas guy, but the Steelers could certainly use someone of that caliber. But I also think the Steelers need to be fully aware of the idea of trying to, complement their current roster as best they can with the talents that could get them where they want. The Steelers, for a time, led the NFL in sacks for 5 straight years. That's insane. But they did it because they were a team that was leading the NFL in sacks. TJ Watt certainly was a star, but Cam Hayward was a star, but they had help from Stephon Tuitt. They had help for some years from Bud Dupree. They had recently, it was Alex Highsmith. There's levels to this. And I think that's where the Steelers need to be looking at defensive line is, do they want another run stuffer? And if they do, great. If maybe you just want to keep your linebackers clean and they're your playmakers. But I think the Steelers are in a position right now where they could really use a pass rusher on the inside. So that being said, again, we go back to the groups and such here. I'm not sure if Sweat is that guy, but certainly could be something to keep an eye on there. Other defensive line prospects are there. Now, Byron Murphy's a guy, the other guy from Texas. He went from being like a maybe first round pick to the, oh no, he's going in the first round type of talk as far as what I've seen, what I've seen out of him. So I think that there's some interesting ideas with that. There's other guys like Michigan's Chris Jenkins who could be interesting to see how he fits in. But bottom line for me, guys, and girls, I guess, as well, on the podcast, I think that the Steelers, they need to get back to having a defensive line that scares people, having a defensive line that also keeps teams from focusing on TJ Watt so much. And that's one thing that the Steelers benefited, was that they've been able to maintain, establish and maintain a really good defensive line. And if Cam Hayward, if I believe him when he says he's coming back next year. I think that's very much part of the plan. But the question for me is going to be, what's going to be the rotation next year if you get a high level defensive lineman? Because if you get a lineman like that, then typically Steelers still make you prove everything to them. But I could totally see the Steelers being like, nope, we're gonna vault that guy up a little bit and get him more experience. And that's where I think some of these other defensive line prospects out there could be interesting to just to keep an eye on, like guys like way back in the list of guys like Dwayne Carter out of Duke, Jackson, McKinley Jackson out of Texas A&M. There's certainly guys who I think that the Steelers, if they're looking at defensive line, they'll need to take a look there. But the question will be, when do you take defensive line? Do you take defensive line if, like, say, Jer'Zahn Newton and Byron Murphy fall to 20 and they're sitting there? Do you take that if, like, all your other options are gone? Like if, center, tackle, and corner, the top guys are gone by that point, do you go defensive line there? I'm not even 100% sure, because I think that there would still be a way for for you to get a really good defensive lineman or a decent defensive lineman at least down the stretch in the draft instead of trying to draft so early. So a lot of different things there, but and there's less defensive line prospects that I'm looking at because I think the Steelers are done with the whole tweener idea at defensive line with what they tried to do with DeMarvin Leal. I think that they want to. I think the Steelers are trying to be in the place where they know what they have and they're big and they're strong defensive linemen. They're setting the tone instead of DeMarvin Leal, who I like as a player. I think that he still has potential, but he has to be put in the right places. But he's a guy who was a healthy scratch at the end of last year, and you can't operate that way if you're trying to be a winning roster by having third-round picks be defensive scratches. Now, maybe he gets bigger and better this year. We'll find out. But for the Steelers, they don't have time to just hope that he figures it out. They have to make it happen. So again, there's guys in here that I think are really interesting. Mike Hall is another defensive lineman I think that could be really interesting to talk to, and guys I want to look at. So there you have it, just some ideas of just players that I'll be looking for at the podium. And just a full note, like these things can get very what's the word for this, just to be accurate, these can be very active, and these will be very over very quickly. These are like 10-minute intervals of guys talking, and I think that could be a very there's going to be some times where you're going to be like, why didn't Chris get all of this guy's thing or all of that guy's thing? And it's just because, like, hey, it's part of the whole thing is that they're all going at the same time, and you're having to ask your questions and try to get it, and then use the clips to hear. And we'll have clips from the combine to post on here soon. So, but just letting y'all know, so that started. We got more to talk about here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll keep it rocking here. But first, we'll remind you this show is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die car alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers to roof racks to exhaust kits, LED lights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit not only available, to U.S. customers. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. So we've gone over some of the different prospects, defensive line and linebacker, that I think could be really interesting. And again, I want to keep emphasizing that this is not, whenever I do these, I'm not telling you what is the way right now. Like these are exploratory. I'm learning with all of you. There's still players at this combine that I haven't even watched more than a highlight reel of what they've done. What I do is whenever I start my research into guys, as far as who I'm targeting and who I think the Steelers should be targeting, as far as when I say targeting, I'm looking at, guys that I am doing the most research on. I do my preliminary research, looking out and finding information on guys, look up their stats, see who intrigues me, and then I start diving into their tape. And that's what I wanted to talk about in this segment, is a little different type of thing. It's not about the Steelers per se. It's just about my process, and how, if you are interested in stuff like this, how you can kind of look at it. And some people don't want to do that. That's why they're listening to this show. But like if you want to learn more about prospects, one thing that can really help is trying to find full game tapes of guys in certain games, and finding the moments that were really big. Looking up when your favorite defensive lineman prospect, the guy that you just think it's just that guy, but you're not sure why. Go look up some of their biggest plays. How did they win those biggest plays? Were they ways that would translate to the NFL? And that's another question as far as itself. But this is how it's kind of put together. And for the Steelers, I think a big part of what they're doing is every year is they're assessing, they're assessing the traits that'll carry over the best, the athletic talent, the character part, and that's how they assemble their big board, and then they go best player available after that. But for me, when I assemble my big board, it is after a lot of research. It is after I don't feel comfortable putting together big boards without watching at least like 3 games for a player that I'm ranking, or at least, watching through 3 games and their contributions to those games before I do that. And I've already assembled a partial big, or I was part of assembling a big board for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, which you can find at post-gazette.com. And I think I did edge rushers, linebackers, corners, safeties, and I think I did punters as well. But in doing that process, it's about going out and finding the top guys out there. And like, I look at other people's big boards as well. It's part of the fun of the draft, right? Like, we're all learning. It's all like, every team can fantasize about getting the perfect player at the position that they really need, that can put them over the top and make them real contenders. That's where I think that the fun of this combine stuff and the NFL draft stuff exists, and why people get so excited about, just Roger Goodell going up and reading a name off a card, and a player walking up and getting a jersey. So there's some of that, but I think what part of the Steelers are going to be looking at here, especially with the different positions, is you got to remember, this is a different front office now. This is a group led by Omar Khan and Andy Weidel. They have cleaned out a lot of what the scouting staff used to be, and that's not to say that scouting staff was bad. That scouting staff did a lot of really good things for the Steelers, but now I'll be intrigued to see what they value over other aspects, because there are times where you might value a cornerback's speed more than you value, say, their change of direction, or maybe their tape. Maybe they tested so well at the combine that you're like, you know what? There's things that are shaky about this tape, but I can fix that. And Mike Tomlin's even talked about that, right? He talked about that on the Pivot last year when he did that interview in his basement with Ryan Clark, Fred Taylor, and all the guys down there, and they're talking about stuff. And he talked about how, like, he wants the challenge to take on guys that people say you shouldn't take on if they're really talented and they're worth it. And he's like, hey, that's where coaching comes into play. I can get that across. And the Steelers are kind of doing that with George Pickens right now. But I also think the Steelers don't want to get too many guys that aren't the leader type. You want to get more guys that are able to contribute like that. And that's where we're going to learn more about this, just from the interview, the podium sessions. How are these guys' demeanors? What are they looking at? How do they approach each day? And the Steelers find those things to be like, okay, this is why we prefer this prospect to that prospect. And then, the rankings start, and then starts the big board as far as building that itself. So, a lot of times, when I'm going through game film, and if I'm lucky and I find all 22 college game film, just somewhere on the internet, that kind of stuff is really valuable, because you can see a lot of different chances for a lot of different situations where, especially for linemen, ways that guys impacted games that didn't show up on stat sheets, or didn't show up, in obvious ways on TV. So that's where I often take a look at, is I want to see like the in-depth thing there. And then I compare them and contrast them across the board. And again, I'm not pretending to be a draft expert per se. I think that I've learned about a lot about the draft, and I like to talk about the draft, and I learn a lot, but there's guys that I learned from about the draft. There's guys that I lean on for that. And we hope to have some of them on throughout the stretch here, throughout the year. But when you're looking at the combine stuff, be excited about the numbers. You're going to see the guy, I think Kent Platt, the guy that does the RAS scores, the relative athletic scores, where it ranks guys in the combine versus guys that have been in the combine the last 30 years or whatever. Those things are important, and remember that's important. But also, when we're talking to these players on from Wednesday on through, I think Saturday is the last day we talk to players. That stuff is really important too, because that's the kind of stuff that can that's the kind of stuff that can determine character. Like when I talked to Keanu Benton last year, and he was a guy I had seen like one full game of, as far as just paying close attention to him, and I liked him, and I thought like, ooh, there's potential there. I think he did really well in the Senior Bowl last year. When I talked to him, I was like, oh, that guy's a Pittsburgh Steeler. And Joey Porter Jr. too, but like that was an obvious one. Joey Porter Jr. grew up with the Steelers. There was just obvious written on that. It wasn't obvious about Keanu Benton. But when I talk to him, I'm like, oh, that's Steeler through and through. And that's why I'm going to be looking at in this combine over the next day or so. Who are the guys that are through that feel like they're the leaders? They're the people that you want to lead the locker room. Those will be the players that we see how they if the Steelers value getting those guys as much. And again, different front office, different rules. We'll see how it plays out. But it's an exciting time to do that at the NFL Combine, which I'm at here in Indianapolis at my hotel room. Again, I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com, and find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every Monday through Friday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Again, sorry for those who aren't getting it on their audio platforms. We hope to have that remedied so you can get it there. But as always, you can find me on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get more of our daily content Monday through Friday. We're back tomorrow with more of the Pittsburgh Steelers and the NFL Combine right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.